Jordan Whitehead was introduced as a Buccaneer, and Jason Light brings in one of his former teammates. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, and just general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/lockedonbucks to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. The Bucs have brought in another former Jet, and Devin White has moved on. That is coming up here in a little bit, but let's start with Jordan Whitehead as he was introduced to the media on Thursday as the newest Buccaneer. Now, for those that didn't see it, please go check out the Buccaneers social media accounts and watch safeties coach Nick Rapone get the news that Whitehead was returning, because it tells you exactly how he and the Buccaneers felt about him. And it was hilarious to watch Jordan Whitehead watch that clip and see the reaction in real time. But Whitehead had plenty to say when he met with the media, and he started by addressing how it felt to be back in Tampa, saying, quote, "It feels good. It feels like home. They drafted me, so I'll always have love being here. It's exciting. I've been upstairs for the last hour or two, but it feels like I never left. People with how much love I'm getting. It brings back a lot of memories. The coaches, Coach Rapone in general, that's one of my favorite coaches I've ever been around. Talking to him this morning kind of brought back the meaning of football and the relationships you build throughout your journey. That's one that I'll never forget. Seeing him brightens my day, and everybody in the building just being back for the second time, I can't be happier." Now, Whitehead was also on the Ronnie and T Crash show on WDAE, and Tom Krasnicki asked Whitehead if he was kind of posturing by posting all of those videos of himself from his Buccaneers days, trying to get himself back in Tampa. And he said that he was. We talked about that last week. We talked about how Jordan Whitehead was posting a lot of videos and highlights of himself in a Buccaneers uniform. And he said, yeah, that's basically exactly what he was doing. He knew the Bucs would see it, and he hoped it would help him be able to sign back here once again. This is what I take away from those comments. A player being where he wants to be carries a lot of weight. They play harder, they care more, and the results generally speak for themselves when a player is happy with their situation. Look no further than Devin White last season, and we're going to talk more about him coming up a little bit later, but he was an unhappy player in a place that he didn't want to be in, and the results showed that. Whitehead coming back to a place that he loved, coached by coaches that he loves, and that know how to best use him and allow him to showcase his talents with teammates that he missed playing with. That's all incredibly important. And I think we may look back on this in about 9 months or so, and we're going to be talking about how Whitehead was one of the steals of free agency, especially given the compensation that the Bucs are giving up over the course of this 2-year deal. And then something else worth noting, and something that I talked about before Whitehead was even brought back, was the ability to add someone that can do everything that Todd Bowles wants his safeties to do in the defensive scheme. Blitz, play the run, drop in coverage, man up against opposing players. And Whitehead seems much more confident in his abilities to do that now after 2 years with the Jets. He was asked if he was surprised that the Bucs didn't bring him back 2 years ago, and if he felt that he was a better player now than he was then. And he said, quote, "When I left, I was bummed out by not being back. Anybody that's going to start new is going to feel a certain way, but you get over that hump when you get there. What I did learn was a different scheme, a different defense, so I had to adjust. It brought out another game in me that some people didn't know I had, or even myself. I knew it was there, but I just needed to show it. We sat back in a lot of cover 4 with the Jets. I was in the pass game a lot and didn't really have any blitzes. I sat back in pass coverage. I was going against Aaron Rodgers every day in camp, and that brought another level out of me. I'd say my game elevated just from being in a pass defense, learning to read coverages, learning to read the offenses, reading the quarterback out of the middle of the field. There was just certain stuff that I didn't get to do as much here because I was in the box so much. I was always labeled as a box safety, but my label now wouldn't say that because I feel comfortable playing man-to-man, playing in the post. I wouldn't say I prefer it, but it's always good to sit back and get interceptions and not just be a big hitter. This is so important for the Buccaneers defense to reach a new level. Last year, they had Antoine Winfield Jr., who could do it all, and he did it all at an elite level. Then they also had Ryan Neal, who could do nothing. Now they have 2 safeties that can do it all, and they can easily disguise who is doing what to bait quarterbacks into mistakes. It may look like Winfield is blitzing, but he drops in coverage, and then Whitehead comes on a delay. It may look like Whitehead is up in the box, but he drops back, and now Winfield is coming screaming off the edge like he did so well last season. The versatility of these 2 players on the field together is going to pay huge dividends for Bowles and the team throughout this upcoming season. Maybe Antoine won't have the same eye-popping numbers that he did last year, but I can tell you that the safeties as a group will have a much better year. So, lots of excitement from the fan base, lots of excitement within the building, and lots of excitement from Jordan Whitehead about this reunion. Going to jump into the chat real quick. Christopher Cole in the chat says, Bucs signed an extra offensive lineman today. Yes, of course they did that. 90 seconds before I went live, I have thrown it quickly into what I am talking about coming up in a little bit because it does blend perfectly. But another big piece for the Buccaneers. Benjamin Rosa in the chat says, will you be covering the latest edition defensive back from the Jets, Bryce Hall? I will be talking about Bryce Hall as well as Devin White. That is coming up next on this episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, just make sure you are coming back on Monday. Plenty more to talk about. I'm sure there is going to be moves made over the weekend, and I will dive a little bit more into the new offensive lineman that the Bucs just signed, just because I didn't have time when the agreement happened right before I went live. But as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m., be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So, the Buccaneers have agreed to a 1-year deal with former Jets cornerback Bryce Hall following their trade of Carlton Davis to the Lions. And I have to say, this is a solid pickup for the Buccaneers to address depth at cornerback, something that they really didn't have last year, and they aren't done adding pieces to that group. Hall was a 5th-round pick in 2020 and has basically been a rotational guy over that span. He's appeared in every game in a season just once and played in only 14 games over the last 2 years. For the first 2 years of his career, he was on the field for over 90% of defensive snaps, but then only 5% in 2022 and then 22% in 2023. But Hall may also contribute on special teams for the Buccaneers, where he played over 45% of special team snaps each of the last 2 years. With cornerback being an extremely talented and deep group in New York, Hall was really limited in his opportunity and is looking to be able to revitalize his career, and he may get that chance in Tampa. As it stands now, you have Jamel Dean and Zion McCollum as your starting corners, but I could see Hall competing with Christian Izien, who I just saw somebody mention in the chat, and I'm sorry I missed it. Oh, here it is. Demon Hunter in the chat says that we have 3 safeties. Don't forget Christian. Well, Izien was primarily the slot corner last year, but although he did a great job at slot corner, I could see Hall competing for that job because the Bucs may move him back to safety given how thin that position is depth-wise. Yes, they brought in Jordan Whitehead as a starter, and that's awesome, and everybody's pumped up and stoked about it. But beyond that, there really isn't a whole lot of depth there. So you could see the Bucs want to move Izien back to safety where he played in college in order to provide some depth. And then, of course, we know Todd Bowles. He likes to roll guys in. He likes to change up the formations and the looks and the player packages. So Izien is still going to get plenty of playing time, but Bryce Hall, I believe, is going to be able to compete for that slot job, especially given his size and his length. He's 6'1", he's 220. We know that Bowles loves those big corners, but over the course of his career, Hall has 2 interceptions, 21 passes defensed, 1 fumble recovery, and 122 tackles. When targeted, he has allowed 64.5% of passes to be completed. So those are numbers that could certainly use some improvement, but they're also not terrible by any means. You go back to Zion McCollum's rookie year, he was allowing over 75% of passes to be completed. Hall in his rookie year was allowing over 71% of passes to be completed. So that number has steadily gone down over the course of Hall's career, but unfortunately, those last 2 seasons, he hasn't had a lot of opportunity. And then, of course, as mentioned, right before I went live, the Buccaneers agreed to a 1-year deal with Ben Bredeson, who is expected to compete for the starting guard job, may even compete for the starting center job, and you may see them move Robert Hainsey over. I think Bredeson is going to be better off at guard, and he's going to be able to compete for that job. He did play for the New York Giants throughout his career so far, started 16 games last season and has started 24 over the last 2 years. I will dive into Bredeson a little bit more on Monday when I've actually had time to dive into this signing and what Bredeson does. Probably going to reach out to Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants. She is as dialed in as anybody about the Giants, and I'll get her opinion on what he may be able to bring to the Buccaneers next season. On another note, we have to talk about it. There is a former Buccaneer who has moved on. Devin White, of course, the first-round pick back in 2019, has agreed to a 1-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles worth up to $7.5 million, a far cry from that $100 million contract that he wanted. And look, Devin asked for a trade last offseason, and then he backtracked. But I don't think he ever really backtracked. He had 2 or 3 pretty solid, impressive games, including week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings. But then you have him sit out against the Packers because he's pouting that he wasn't going to start. And then KJ Britt, who took over as the starter for him, got the majority of the playing time for the rest of the year, including in the playoffs. I'm going to say this on Devin White, and we won't really ever have to talk about him again until the Bucs play the Eagles. The Buccaneers do not win Super Bowl 55 without the run that Devin White went on in the playoffs. It was an all-time performance for those 3 games that he played, because remember, he missed the wild card round against the Washington football team at the time because of COVID protocols. And for that, he will forever be remembered fondly by Bucs fans. Even those that soured on him after that season, and because of the attitude, because of last season, because of the disappearing in games, even those that soured on Devin White are going to look back on that 2020 playoff run very fondly. But for those Eagles fans that are tuning in because they want to know what I have to say about the Bucs losing Devin White, or what they may be gaining in Devin White, or just want to hear my thoughts on Devin White in general, I'm going to say this. He can absolutely flourish in Philadelphia if they use him as a pass rusher. He is still going to be a liability in coverage, just like he always was. He is still going to over-pursue in the run game like he always has. But using him as a free runner to get to the quarterback can flip a game on its head instantly. And with the other defensive weapons in Philadelphia, they probably have the luxury of utilizing Devin White in exactly that way for the vast majority of his defensive snaps. They signed Bryce Huff. They have Jordan Davis. They have Jalen Carter. They just agreed to a restructured deal with Josh Sweat, who I talked about being a potential trade candidate for the Buccaneers. He's staying in Philadelphia. You have to think they're going to move on from Hassan Reddick now. They have Nakobe Dean. This defense has a lot of pieces, so they can focus on letting Devin White do what he does best, and that's get after the quarterback and be that guy that can run freely up the middle and disrupt opposing quarterbacks. But come week 6, when you see him give up a wheel route that goes to the house for the 3rd time, or turn a 2-yard gain into a 12-yard gain because he overran the ball carrier, do not say I didn't warn you. Devin White is an insanely athletic and talented linebacker that still has very, very obvious shortcomings. But Philadelphia, I think, is the right spot for him in a incentive-laden deal where they have the other pieces around him to be able to utilize him primarily as a pass rusher, which is kind of what you saw the Buccaneers do towards the tail end of last year when he became that pass rush specialist and they would take KJ Britt off the field. But the response and the reaction that I saw out of Eagles fans on social media, you are not getting the Devin White that you think you are getting. So don't come back to me and say that I didn't warn you about what you are going to get out of Devin White this upcoming season. Demon Hunter in the chat says, these are the safeties we were looking for. I have to imagine that you're referencing my Star Wars paraphernalia back behind me in the new backdrop there. Let's see. G Vegas says Devin can ride his horses on a Pennsylvania Amish farm. He'll probably love that. There's no doubt about it. And we have Christopher in the chat saying Eagles fans are going to see how awful White is. I'm not going to say that Devin White is awful. I just said I believe that he is an insanely athletic and talented linebacker, but he's not perfect. And I will say this, that Philadelphia has going for them. The last time the Bucs had a fan favorite level linebacker like Devin White was Quan Alexander. And you saw Quan Alexander get broken off by the San Francisco 49ers in free agency, and that blew up in their face. Philadelphia is not making the same mistake. They want him to go out there, put up the big numbers, prove that he's worth a long-term deal, which he might get with Philadelphia, or he can drastically improve his free agent stock going into next year. But what or how is the Bucs roster shaping up through the first 5 days of this free agency period? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, futures. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Right now, UConn is the favorite to win it all at plus 480, with Houston at plus 650, Purdue at plus 700, and Tennessee with the fourth highest odds at plus 1,000. The Gators are plus 6,500. Florida Atlantic is plus 13,000, and USF is a whopping plus 30,000. So a $5 bet on USF to win it all could win you a cool $1,500 if you believe the Bulls are going to shock the world. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Wrapping things up here on a Friday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Demon Hunter in the chat says, do they have Publix in Philly? No, I don't think they do, but I'm super excited because they're putting some Publix in northern Kentucky, which is a short drive for me. So guess who's going to be going to Publix every weekend to load up on pub subs, take my cooler down there and load those up. Very, very excited about that. And then there was another comment Demon Hunter again in the chat. Yes, very much so, in reference to making a Star Wars reference because of my new pretty Darth Vader that I have back there. Very excited about that. But if the season started today, the Bucs could in fact field a team. It may not be pretty, but they can do it. So let's start on the offensive side of the ball and take a look at who the Buccaneers have, starting with the offensive line from left to right. You have Tristan Wirfs, Logan Sternberg, or Ben Bredesen, if he competes for that guard spot. You have Robert Hainsey, Cody Mauch, and Luke Gedeke. Then you have Baker Mayfield, Rashad White, Cade Otton, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, some key depth guys, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Jarrett, Devin Tompkins, Keeft, and Payne Durham. Defensively, you have Logan Hall, Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, Joe Tryon, Shoyinka, KJ Britt, Levante David, Yaya Diaby, Zion McCollum, Jordan Whitehead, Antoine Winfield Jr., Jamel Dean, Christian Izien, with some key depth guys being Greg Gaines, Anthony Nelson, Servassier Dennis, Bryce Hall, Kayvon Merriweather, and Josh Hayes. Now, I run through all of that to take a look at what the Buccaneers still need. As far as starters are concerned, you still need an impact edge rusher. You still need a guard, even with the addition of Bredesen. Potentially a corner, but I think they're okay with Zion being the starter there. And then potentially a linebacker. Depth-wise, you need a running back, wide receiver, safety, guard. If Bredesen's your starter, you need a guard, as a depth piece. And you need a quarterback, which is not something that we really have talked about a whole lot. But if the Bucs are going to do anything else in free agency, there's a 99% chance that it's going to be for depth. That includes Bredesen. Again, I'm going to go ahead and reach out to Patricia. She will be able to tell us a lot about what the Bucs are getting in him. But you're not finding a starting impact edge rusher on the market right now for a price that you can afford. And I see some people in the chat saying Chase Young. No, you do not want Chase Young. Chase Young had a good rookie season, and since then, he has been bad. He flourished a little bit thanks to how many playmakers the 49ers had last year, but you can go and you can listen to former Locked On Bucs co-host David Harrison on Locked On Commanders talk about how one of the best moves that they made was getting rid of Chase Young. He's not as good as people want to make him out to be. Maybe you could say he's the edge rusher version of Devin White. He's not impactful. He is the Robin to somebody else's Batman. He's not going to be able to put up impactful numbers as the number one guy. He has to rely on other guys being the focal point of opposing offenses so that he gets his opportunity. He does not, in and of himself, make the Bucs pass rush better. If he signs somewhere and has a breakout season, I'll eat my crow, because God knows I did it with CJ Stroud. But no, Chase Young, number one, is going to want an enormous amount of money that he is not worth. And he just is not going to improve the edge rush by himself that much. They could still go out and they could get a cheap veteran quarterback to round out the room, because right now it's only Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. I would expect them to go out and get a young or a cheap, experienced veteran. I can't see them rounding out the quarterback room with a draft pick. It just wouldn't make much sense to me. You want another veteran in that room. You can still go out and get a versatile offensive lineman that you can use at a few different positions as far as depth is concerned. You can still find a wide receiver. I've talked on the show a few times about how I think Van Jefferson would be a solid addition to the wide receiver room. Very little pressure, very low risk, very high reward for a cheap price, because I think Van Jefferson can flourish in Liam Cohn's offense, with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin being the two alphas. Van Jefferson can kind of sneak in there and do what we expected Russell Gage to do. But now we're heading into the draft knowing that two of the picks on the first 2 days are going to be edge rusher, and I still think guard. Unless they make a trade, which is possible but not likely, until a deal gets done with Wirfs, Winfield, or Godwin, or a restructure happens with Vita Vea. And one of those, at least, is still happening no matter what, because Whitehead, David, and the Hall contracts have not shown up on Spot Track or Over the Cap yet. And both of those places have the Bucs with around $3.5 million in cap space, and are still showing that Russell Gage is on the roster, because the Buccaneers have not made that release official yet. So there still needs to be contract moves that are done again, Wirfs and Whitehead are the two for sure ones that are coming. It's just a matter of when. But with all the moves that have been happening, and poor David over on Locked On Commanders that is talking about essentially an entirely new roster, I thought it was really important to kind of take the end of this week and do a little reset so that you all knew what the Bucs had in terms of their starters and their key depth right now, and where the focus is going to shift to moving forward as they continue this free agency period and we start ramping up the draft coverage here coming up in about the next week. There's still some of the same holes that we have been talking about leading up to free agency, but some glaring weaknesses when you put it all out on paper. Going to jump in the chat one more time before we get out of here. David in the chat says that we just signed a guard. Let's see. Oh, he's responding to Flash Gordon in the chat. He says, as of picking up Bryce Hall and Jordan Whitehead, I'd go with defensive end in the first, Darius Robinson, then offensive tackle in the second, then best player available the rest of the way. Their offensive tackles are set. They love Luke Gedeke on the right side, and Gedeke overall had a really, really impressive season. So I don't think they need a tackle. We'll see how Bredesen does and how he kind of fits. I'll dive into more of that on Monday. And I'll see if Patricia can fire up something for me to play for all of you in terms of what he brought for the Giants last year. Destined for Greatness says, what do you think of Josh Reynolds from Detroit? I think he could be a solid wide receiver 3 and has experience in the offense with Cone. I don't hate it. I'll have to look into it a little more. I think Josh Reynolds is going to command a little bit more money than Van Jefferson will. I think you can get Van Jefferson for almost the league minimum, given kind of the struggles that he's had, both in terms of his opportunity in Atlanta last year, and then he's had some injury issues. And I think you have the connection there already with Baker. I mean, he was Baker's number one receiver when he went to the Rams. So I think the fit might be a little bit better. I do think Reynolds is more talented. I will say that. So it would be interesting to see if they pursue that. But who knows? Reynolds may want to stay in Detroit if they want him back. You know, still plenty of free agents out there that can contribute to teams. I just don't think you're going to see any more major splashes unless the Bucs pull off a trade for Hassan Reddick. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. And if you go back a couple of weeks, you'll see that I did a full deep dive into trading for Hassan Reddick, but it's going to take some salary cap gymnastics. And you're probably going to have to not only extend Winfield and Wirfs, but you're going to have to do something with Godwin and Vita Vea in order to free up enough money for all that to happen. Because remember, the Bucs still need a little bit under $9 million as it stands right now to be able to sign all of their draft picks. So that is money that is going to have to be freed up at some point. No hurry, but keep that in the back of your mind that the Bucs still need about $9 million to sign their draft class. Another quick one. Flash says, move Malk to center. Nope. Leave Malk at right guard. You have Gedeke at right tackle. And then Bredesen could be the center, probably going to be guard. We'll see if he's going to be a depth piece or a starter piece. And I think Hainsey's probably, unless Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon, unless he is the best player available. If you have Jared Verse and Latu and Chop Robinson all gone by 26, if you have Graham Barton gone at 26, you have Rakestraw and Kool-Aid are gone by 26, but Powers Johnson is still sitting there. You could draft the best center in the class and move Hainsey over to guard, but I think Hainsey is going to be your center moving forward. That is going to do it for this episode because I have run way over on time. And make sure you are coming back on Monday. I will get more into Bredesen, and I'm sure the Bucs will have done a thing or two, maybe signed another guy, maybe done an extension or a restructure to free up some money over the weekend. But we will continue to react to everything happening as part of this free agent frenzy period. And hopefully we'll have some salary cap updates with those new players that the Bucs have signed and where they stand as far as the cap is concerned. And if anything major happens, like they do make a splash trade for a Hassan Reddick or something like that, I will bring you an emergency bonus episode to break it all down. In the meantime, please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.